This man was confined within a peculiar room, compelled to push the mill for over 740 rotations every day. Despite being exhausted, he dared not rest because doing so could cost him his life. It began on a morning when Joe woke up. He found himself in a strange room. He checked his pockets and realized that his phone was missing. Joe repeatedly banged on the door, calling for someone to release him, but there was no response. He couldn't understand why he was in this place. Just a moment ago, he was applying for a high-level management position at the company, and now he mysteriously ended up here. When he shouted for help, a man's voice from the wall told him to be quiet. Joe quickly followed the sound to an air vent. The man on the other side explained that they were all applicants, and to secure the job, they needed to undergo an experiment. The next few days would be challenging, and Joe should prepare mentally. When Joe tried to ask further, the man said he had to work and didn't answer anymore. Joe wanted to leave, so he attempted to jump on the wall and escape, but the wall was high, and there was nowhere to grip. He tried for a long time, but was unsuccessful. At this moment, a noisy sound came from the door, followed by someone throwing food and water inside. Seeing this, Joe quickly reached out to plead for his release. He no longer wanted to apply for this position and needed to go home urgently to take care of his pregnant wife. The guard not only refused, but also used a sharp object to stab Joe's arm. But this wasn't the worst part. As he was about to eat, a warning sound echoed, followed by desperate screams from the adjacent rooms. Joe, filled with fear, huddled in a corner, unsure of what awaited him ahead. The next morning, as per the guard's request, he threw garbage into the vent. He accidentally discovered some hair on the ground. Curious, he dug into the soil and found a skull, terrifying him. He hastily approached the wall, asking the man on the other side what had happened. The man calmly explained that the skull belonged to someone who was here before Joe. Joe could only stare in bewilderment, unsure if this was a regular company and why they engaged in such murderous activities. The man explained that everything was written in the terms they had signed before the interview, but nobody bothered to read it clearly before signing. At this moment, the system on the wall suddenly lit up, assigning tasks to Joe. He was required to push a mill from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. Each rotation earned him a point, and his task was to reach 50 points. Failure to meet the goal would result in punishment. The person with the lowest score would be eliminated, which was the horrifying scream Joe heard yesterday. Joe understood that the consequence for the person with the lowest score was death. With no other option, he obediently started working, motivated by the desire to avoid the grim fate that awaited those with low scores. Driven by the desire to survive, he didn't dare to take any breaks, even pushing himself to an outstanding 100 points. In the evening, the agonizing screams resurfaced, but Joe seemed accustomed to them and was no longer afraid. The next morning, before starting his tasks, Joe wanted to ask his inmates some questions. However, he was reminded that they were each other's competitors, and Joe was advised not to reveal his daily score to others. Otherwise, people might try to outscore him, leading to elimination. Naturally, Joe understood this, as it was the reason he worked harder than others in pushing the mill. While pushing, he couldn't help but think of his wife and the impending arrival of their child. At the end of the day, Joe achieved a new score of 150 points. However, he was surprised when the guard called him out. Despite achieving such a high score, Joe was instructed to undress and step outside, having no choice but to comply. Beyond the iron door, slowly opening into the darkness, Joe walked in. Suddenly the lights turned on, and before he could react, he was sprayed with water. Then, a bar of soap was thrown at him. It turned out that the reward for 150 points was a shower. The next day, Joe thought that the higher score might lead to better rewards. If he could secure the first position, he might be able to leave this place. With this speculation and the yearning for his wife, he pushed the mill to 370 points. Exhausted, he lay on the ground. Suddenly, he noticed the name Alex carved on the handle. Joe asked his inmate who Alex was. He explained that Alex was the only person who had successfully escaped from this place, but no one knew how he did it. Today, Joe achieved a high score, and the company rewarded him with a pen engraved with his name. He was angry because he saw no use for a pen in this place. Frustrated, he vented his anger at the system, venting all his frustration accumulated over the past few days. But it only made the situation more difficult. The system assigned him a daily task of at least 370 points, changing the rule that only awarded a point every 2 rotations. This meant he needed to push the mill 740 times to complete the daily task, an incredibly challenging feat. And those around him heard that his daily task had increased to 370 points. Everyone expressed their discontent, accusing him of disrupting the rules because he raised the targets for everyone. To survive, Joe had no choice but to grit his teeth and push the mill. However, despite giving his all, he could only push it for more than 500 rotations. Failing to meet the task, the system decided to punish him severely by assigning him a teammate who turned out to be his 7-month pregnant wife. This punishment terrified Joe, and he pleaded with the system for a chance, not wanting his wife to endure such hardship. Joe promised to complete the daily goal excellently. In response, the system granted him an opportunity. If he could achieve the task the next day, his wife would not be brought in. The following day, a strange triangular frame suddenly appeared on the ceiling, resembling a sun emitting relentless heat. The system commanded Joe to complete the task in this scorching heat. For the sake of his wife, he endured and persevered, pushing the mill. By the end of the day, he successfully completed 740 rotations. For his outstanding performance, the system rewarded him by projecting a film of his wife giving birth. This situation was bizarre because Joe vividly remembered that just a few days ago, his wife was only 7 months pregnant. How could she give birth so quickly? Joe had missed the joyful moment of his child's birth. Due to his previous rule breaking, his inmate had refrained from talking to Joe for a long time. Feeling remorseful, Joe took the initiative to apologize and begged for forgiveness. As it turned out, the man was also a family man, like Joe. At that moment, the man revealed that he knew how Alex had escaped. He pointed to the opposite wall where Alex had drilled a hole to make his getaway. Joe quickly checked, and indeed, there were traces of repair on the wall. Using the pen the company had rewarded him with, Joe began to drill a hole in the wall. In the days that followed, alongside completing his daily task, Joe used the pen to work on the wall. It took a considerable amount of time, but eventually, he succeeded in making a hole. Hurriedly, he tried to escape, but unexpectedly, a guard appeared and knocked him unconscious. Upon waking up, Joe found himself back in that room, and all his efforts seemed to have gone up in smoke. The system penalizes Joe by increasing his score to 1,000, but there are only a few hours left before the deadline. His inmate, for revealing the escape route, had his leg broken as punishment. At this point, he decided to let Joe know that he was the one who helped create the system for the company. Initially, it wasn't as cruel, and it wasn't clear why it could autonomously modify algorithms, making the experimental program increasingly brutal. The man revealed that he was Alex and emphasized that there was no escape from this place. Hearing this, Joe had an idea. The system likely operated based on mathematical operations. If everyone's score was 0, the system wouldn't be able to calculate and no one would be punished. Joe climbed onto the mill and shouted to everyone, urging them to unite and destroy the system to escape and reunite with their families. Inspired by Joe's words, the people unanimously agreed and supportive sounds echoed around. Joe calmly sat, waiting for time to pass. As it approached the end, Joe wore his vest and confidently awaited the moment of victory. But he was not prepared for the intelligence of the system. With only 4 minutes left before the deadline, the system suddenly announced a new rule. If anyone had a score of 0, the company would terminate them. The sound of pushing mills echoed around. Joe shouted, telling everyone to stop, but they didn't listen. They continued pushing, unwilling to die for Joe. Despite Joe's screams, only the noise of the mills persisted. At that moment, the system announced that Joe's time had expired. To prevent him from regretting before death, the system projected images of his wife and child. Strangely, it was apparent that in just a few days, the child had grown rapidly. Time seemed to pass faster inside this place. Shortly after, the steel door opened and a group of people entered. Seeing this, Joe begged for help, but they seemed indifferent. Then a guard entered, wearing gloves and preparing a syringe. Realizing he couldn't escape, Joe risked his life and attacked the guard, engaging in a fierce battle. He landed powerful punches on the guard's face, and strangely, those around didn't intervene. Instead, they revealed a sinister smile. It turned out that everything that had just happened was not reality, but a special recruitment test by the company. The guard, who seemed to be an enemy, was in fact the director of human resources. The 2-year-long experiment had only taken an hour. During the experiment, Joe showcased his intelligence and leadership skills, leading the company to hire him for a high-level position. Furthermore, they provided a comfortable working environment. The director explained that the job required high security, and Joe couldn't disclose it to anyone, including colleagues and family. He offered an exceptionally high salary and numerous benefits for Joe to sign. Despite Joe's suspicion that this might be another experiment, he still signed the contract. Afterward, he calmly took out his phone and called his wife, informing her about the job and promising to be home on time tonight. This is the end of the movie. If you enjoy it, please like and subscribe to support my channel. Thanks for watching.